Is freedom really a choice? A Kabbalistic view of free will by Rabbi Dr. Michael H. Koplitz. This question presents a compelling subject for examination. It is commonly asserted that Adonai grants human beings free will, understood as the freedom to choose and act according to one's desires. This assumption is so deeply embedded within both Jewish and Christian traditions that it is rarely subjected to critical scrutiny. Precisely because this belief is so widely accepted, it warrants careful examination to determine whether it is in fact accurate. Kabbalistic thinkers, particularly Rabbi Yehuda Ashlag, Baal HaSulam, address this question in significant depth. In The Wisdom of Kabbalah, Baal HaSulam and other scholars present a nuanced understanding of human freedom. According to Baal HaSulam, the soul initially possesses freedom of choice regarding the environment it elects to pursue. Beyond this initial selection, however, human beings function largely as mechanisms influenced and driven by external forces that compel behavior in particular directions. This assertion raises an important question. To what external forces was Baal HaSulam referring? Baal HaSulam identifies two primary forces that govern human action: pleasure and pain. Human behavior is frequently motivated by the pursuit of pleasure or by actions believed to lead to pleasurable outcomes. Conversely, individuals often endure discomfort or hardship to avoid greater pain or deprivation. Everyday experience illustrates this dynamic clearly. Many individuals, for example, rise each morning to attend jobs they openly dislike. Surveys consistently indicate widespread dissatisfaction with employment, yet people continue to work under such conditions. The reason for this apparent contradiction lies in necessity. Employment provides income, which is essential for survival and, in numerous instances, enables access to various forms of pleasure. These pleasures range from basic security and material comfort to leisure, travel, charitable giving, and other activities that require financial resources. Even rest itself, such as paid time off for holidays, is experienced as pleasurable precisely because income continues without the requirement of labor. This explains why holidays are so highly valued, particularly when they do not require work. For some individuals, however, income barely meets the minimum requirements for survival. In such cases, the pain associated with labor may not be sufficiently offset by the pleasures money can provide. Nevertheless, individuals continue to work because the alternative, financial insecurity or deprivation, represents an even greater form of pain. Thus, human choice often operates within constrained parameters, shaped less by absolute freedom than by the competing pressures of pleasure and pain. I have known individuals who enjoy working on holidays because they receive 1.5 or even twice their regular salary. The additional income generated through overtime can be a source of pleasure. Yet this pleasure can also transform into pain. In my experience, during my youth, I worked extensive overtime while serving as the technical supervisor for a major computer conversion project. Although the overtime compensation was initially appealing, it eventually became burdensome, as I had little time to enjoy the additional income. In this way, what begins as pleasure can quickly become a source of discomfort or dissatisfaction. Another dimension of freedom concerns situations in which individuals feel compelled to act in certain ways due to social expectations. For example, whether one attends a church or a synagogue, worship services often involve repeated patterns of standing and sitting. I recall attending my first church service and remaining seated while the rest of the congregation stood. I immediately felt deeply awkward and soon stood simply to conform. The discomfort did not end there, as the congregation began singing hymns unfamiliar to me. My wife kindly handed me a hymnal, but this provided little relief. Feeling pressured to fit in, I moved my lips as though singing. In that moment, the question arose, where was my freedom not to stand or sing? Ironically, when I later learned the hymns and sang with confidence, I was asked not to sing because I was unable to sing in tune. I have felt compelled to learn the hymns to participate fully, only to be told that my participation was unwelcome. Again, the question of free will emerged. While I technically retained the freedom to sing regardless of others' opinions, doing so became uncomfortable once I had been discouraged. Social pressure, rather than explicit prohibition, effectively constrained my freedom. A similar tension appears in matters as ordinary as eating and drinking. What, for example, is wrong with leftover pizza for breakfast? During my college years, this was considered an entirely acceptable meal before an exam. Why not ice cream sundaes for lunch? From early childhood, however, our choices regarding food are often regulated, most commonly by our mothers, who instruct us on what we may or may not eat. Many can recall being required to eat Brussels sprouts or other disliked vegetables. Even worse, for some, was being served liver. In such situations, the choice was stark: eat the food or skip dinner altogether. The decision became one of weighing hunger pain against the displeasure of eating unwanted food. In the case of liver, I consistently chose hunger. These examples illustrate how human choice is frequently shaped and constrained by competing forces of pleasure and pain, as well as by social and cultural expectations. What appears, on the surface, to be free will typically operates within boundaries established by necessity, conformity, and the desire to avoid discomfort. When one is alone, the freedom to choose what to eat appears virtually unlimited. During one week when my wife was away on a mission trip, I ate Chinese food for 3 evenings and deluxe pizza for 3 more. While such a diet may not be considered nutritionally ideal, it was undeniably pleasurable. At the same time, I was fully aware that this manner of nourishment was not conducive to long-term health. Yet this freedom diminishes in communal settings. If dining with friends, one would not ordinarily order only desserts. Social convention compels individuals to conform to the group by ordering at least an entree before dessert. Once again, choice exists, but it is constrained by social expectations. Rabash reminds us that human freedom is initially expressed in the selection of an environment, one that fosters positive influences or one that cultivates negative ones. If a person chooses a destructive environment, such as a life of criminal behavior, that individual must also accept the consequences that follow. When such actions result in incarceration, the experience is undeniably painful. This pain is not arbitrary. Rather, it is the outcome of choosing an environment that appeared pleasurable on the surface, but was ultimately harmful. Praise and reward arise from good thoughts and righteous deeds. In Kabbalistic terms, this is the means by which one acquires a favorable environment for the soul. A good environment is shaped by the Yetzer Tov, good inclination, while a corrupt environment is governed by the Yetzer Ra, evil inclination. Scripture affirms this principle in Deuteronomy 30:19, where humanity is exhorted to choose life. This command implies that God desires human beings to exercise free will by selecting an environment influenced by the good inclination. Kabbalah further teaches that the world is judged according to its majority, and that individuals are likewise judged by the majority. This concept raises profound questions concerning divine justice, particularly in relation to the final tikkun. According to this view, God ultimately judges humanity as a collective environment, either righteous or corrupt. At first glance, this may seem unjust to those who have devoted their lives to cultivating a good environment. However, Kabbalistic tradition also allows for mechanisms by which individuals may be judged independently, suggesting a more nuanced understanding of judgment within the process of tikkun. In this context, the imagery found in 1 Enoch may offer valuable insight. In the Book of the Watchers, 1 Enoch 1-36, the mountain of the dead is described as containing 4 distinct chambers. The chamber most desired is that of the righteous, a place characterized by divine presence and spiritual fulfillment. This chamber represents the most desirable state of the afterlife. Entry into it is not arbitrary. Rather, it is attained by living a righteous life. Thus, even within apocalyptic literature, The emphasis remains on moral responsibility and the long-term consequences of one's choices. According to Kabbalistic belief, every soul makes an initial and decisive choice regarding the environment in which it will ultimately reside. Kabbalah teaches that souls descend through the Sephirot and are sent to Malkut, the earthly realm, to demonstrate to Adonai whether they will live in accordance with divine commandments. Souls that strive to the best of their ability to live in goodness are eventually returned to the upper waters of the tree of life. This return represents reunion with the divine source from which the soul originated. Because Adonai desires the return of the soul, the question arises, does genuine freedom of choice exist? Kabbalistic tradition affirms that such freedom does exist, most clearly in the soul's initial choice of environment. From that point forward, the soul lives out its earthly existence within the parameters of that chosen environment. The pleasure described in the Book of the Watchers, specifically in the chamber of the righteous within the mountain of the dead, is portrayed as so profoundly compelling that the choice seems self-evident. Naturally, the soul longs to return to a place permeated by the love and presence of Adonai. Conversely, the mountain of the dead also contains a chamber designated for the wicked. This chamber is described as a realm of pain and suffering, where souls are cut off permanently from the light and love of Adonai. These souls are unable to leave and are ultimately consigned to the depths of Hades, where they exist eternally without divine illumination and under the influence of Satan. It is striking and troubling that many individuals nonetheless select paths that lead to this outcome. Of course, for those who reject the concept of hell or deny the existence of an afterlife, post-mortem judgment is of little concern. This raises a broader ethical question. What would become of society if people truly believed that there were no consequences beyond this life? Why pursue goodness if there is no ultimate reward? It is here that the concepts of pleasure and pain reemerge. A righteous life yields both present pleasure and future reward, while an evil life may result in short-term gratification, but culminates in long-term suffering. Thus, moral behavior is framed not only as obedience, but also as an alignment with ultimate well-being. An additional question must be addressed. What happens when fundamentally good souls commit actions that are considered evil? Is there hope for them? Midrash teaches that there are no perfect souls. According to one tradition, before the creation of the universe, the spirit of the Torah stood before Adonai and expressed concern that humanity would inevitably find ways to violate the Torah and thereby sin. Adonai responded by assuring the Torah that within its words existed both forgiveness for sin and a means for repairing the broken soul. These restorative forces are understood through the Sephirot of Gevurah, justice, and Hesed. Together, they operate in balance, ensuring that judgment is tempered by compassion. Justice and mercy thus work in tandem, administering accountability where necessary while preserving the possibility of repentance and restoration. The concept of Avadan teaches that after death, the soul enters a state in which the sinfulness accumulated during its earthly existence is purged. Souls that seek a good environment inevitably encounter evil along their journey, and the wounds inflicted by the evil inclination must be healed before the soul can enter the upper waters. Missteps along the path to righteousness are not final. They are capable of repair. Kabbalistic tradition emphasizes that Adonai desires the return of souls to himself. The existence of post-mortem judgment, together with the prospect of eternity in either the upper waters or hell, strongly influences the soul's initial choice. At this foundational stage, the soul exercises genuine freedom of choice. Once that choice is made, the soul proceeds along the path corresponding to the environment it has selected. Over time, subsequent choices become increasingly shaped and clarified by the nature of that environment. This raises an important question. Can a soul change course, moving from evil to good or from good to evil? A transition from a good environment to an evil one would seem unlikely without some profound or traumatic experience. Such a change might arise, for example, from an overwhelming desire for revenge. In this case, the soul would need to act with awareness of the consequences that accompany such a shift. A movement from evil to good, by contrast, represents a transition from pain to pleasure, and is therefore a far more desirable transformation. This transformation requires acknowledgement of prior wrongdoing, acceptance of responsibility, and the making of restitution and sincere apologies where possible. In such cases, Avedon serves its restorative function by fully cleansing the soul. Why then would a soul ever choose pain over pleasure? From a theological perspective, selecting pleasure, understood as life in the light of Adonai, ought to be the natural desire of every soul. Adonai assists humanity in cultivating a pleasant and righteous environment through the Torah. To live in the place of the Torah means to align one's life with its ethical and spiritual guidance. The Torah contains 613 mitzvot, traditionally categorized into two overarching principles: love of God and love of one's neighbor. For practical purposes, these commandments may also be organized into four categories: love of God, love of neighbor, temple sacrifices, and commandments specific to Jewish identity. Since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 135 CE, the mitzvot related to temple worship are no longer operative. Commandments concerning food laws, clothing, and aspects of holiness are traditionally understood as obligations specific to Jewish souls, serving to set apart the people of Adonai. The commandments to love God and love one's neighbor, however, are universal in scope. These principles apply to every soul and form the foundation for righteous living. It is by living according to these commandments that souls can ultimately return to the upper waters and dwell once more in the presence of Adonai. Why did Adonai give humanity the mitzvot? Within a Kabbalistic framework, the mitzvot function as guides designed to persuade the soul that life within a good environment is ultimately preferable. The commandments direct the Torah-observant soul toward goodness, shaping habits and dispositions that foster a joyful life characterized by pleasure and minimal pain. In this sense, the soul is continually presented with opportunities to make the right choice. This raises an important philosophical question. Is there genuine freedom of choice when one path is associated with pleasure, prosperity, and an afterlife with Adonai, while the alternative is marked by pain and an eternal separation in hell? Is this truly a choice at all? One might reasonably ask why any soul would choose a life of pain, yet such choices are made. A possible conclusion is that Adonai grants humanity the freedom to decide its environment, while simultaneously stacking the deck in favor of the good environment by making it profoundly attractive. The goodness of the righteous path is not concealed. It is intentionally made desirable. A final caution must be noted. Souls that have decided an evil environment can exert significant influence on those who are striving to live within a good one. An illustrative example may be drawn from a Christian context, though a similar situation could easily occur within a synagogue. In one small city, two churches within the same denomination proposed merging their ministries. After deliberation, one congregation voted unanimously in favor of the merger, while the other approved it by a 90% majority. In both cases, individuals were provided the opportunity to decide, which suggests the presence of free choice. In the congregation that approved the merger by 90%, it became evident that the dissenting 10% did not share the same commitment to a healthy communal environment. Their opposition stemmed not from theological disagreement, but from personal dislike of members of the other church. Despite the overwhelming majority in favor, the merger proceeded under strained conditions. The dissenting minority initiated a passive-aggressive campaign that gradually transformed the environment of the congregation from one that was constructive to one that was toxic. Rather than addressing the disruption directly, the leadership of the majority allowed the minority to remain and exert influence. Over time, the resulting tension became intolerable. Eventually, the leaders abandon the merger, unable to endure the sustained pain caused by the dissenting group. In retrospect, the failure to require the minority to leave the congregation allowed a few individuals to pollute the environment of the whole community. Ultimately, the demands of the minority prevailed, and the merger was dissolved. This example illustrates how an evil or destructive environment can overwhelm a good one when it is permitted to do so. Even when the majority chooses rightly, the failure to protect the integrity of the good environment can result in its collapse. In such cases, the consequences of choice extend beyond the individual soul to the collective spiritual health of the community. For those who have chosen a good environment and who strive to live in accordance with Adonai's mitzvot, a caution is necessary. Destructive individuals may actively attempt to impede this path. For various reasons, such souls come to believe that they possess greater insight than that embodied in the Torah. When permitted entry into healthy communal or spiritual environments, they can undermine and ultimately damage those environments. One may reasonably ask why such disruption is allowed to occur. Often, it persists because well-intentioned individuals hold the mistaken belief that every destructive influence can be transformed through patience and goodwill alone. There are indeed circumstances in which good overcomes evil. However, it must also be acknowledged that some souls are deeply attached to pain and seek to externalize that pain by imposing it on others. In Kabbalistic terms, once the kelipot, the husks associated with the evil inclination, fully envelop a soul, the light of Adonai can no longer penetrate. In such cases, attempts at persuasion, kindness, or moral instruction are ineffective. Wisdom, therefore, requires separation. Prolonged exposure to such individuals risks drawing even well-intentioned souls toward a destructive environment. Moreover, there are many circumstances in earthly life in which human beings do not possess full freedom of will. Certain choices are constrained or predetermined by conditions beyond individual control, and this reality must be acknowledged rather than denied. Spiritual maturity requires the ability to recognize these limitations and to respond wisely within them. The concept of free will remains a subject of enduring debate, one unlikely to reach definitive resolution. Within the framework presented here, however, a clear distinction emerges. The soul's initial and most significant choice, the decision between a good environment and an evil one, constitutes genuine free will. After that foundational decision is made, subsequent choices are largely shaped by the environment the soul has chosen to inhabit. For this reason, the imperative is clear. Decide wisely at the outset. The initial choice establishes the trajectory of the soul's life, influences the nature of its later decisions, and ultimately determines its capacity to remain in the light of Adonai.